African Nova Scotian Men and Youth Conference. And this is done by a 2-year funding given by the Standing Together Grant in collaboration with the ASW. He is also a graduate of Carleton University, Ottawa, from where he received a Bachelor of Science in Neuroscience and Mental Health with a minor in psychology. He is also a full-time member of Word in Action Ministries International, where he heads the sound and the media department. He has a passion for community and will do whatever he can to help out those around him. That is why it is my complete honor and privilege to introduce to you my friend, Preston Simmons.
Hello, hello. How's everybody doing today? Hope you guys are doing good. So, yeah, I'm excited to give this talk to you guys. Originally, this was only, I won't say only, but it was mainly for engaging African youths and men in our communities. And for this time, it's going to be different. We have women and others, or if you ever don't feel identified, and join with us today as an African Nova Scotian community. And I'm interested to hear you guys' input, so feel free to chime in with any questions, if you have anything to say. Feel free to chime in at any point in time. All right, so let's get started.
This is the screen.
So first, I'd like to talk about what violence is. And the World Health Organization classifies violence as the intentional use of physical force or power, threatened or actual, against oneself, another person, or against a group or community that results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, death, psychological harm, maldevelopment, or deprivation. And domestic violence. So domestic violence is not a racial issue. It cuts across all race and doesn't matter where you're from, what your culture is, how old you are, crosses through socioeconomic lines. And it is mostly perpetrated by men on women, but can also happen in same-sex relationships and vice versa. And yeah, another interesting fact that I thought of last night was it also can occur from elder to children and from children to elder, as well as grandparents on their grandchildren as well. Domestic violence. So people who often believe that can't say that. People who are survivors of domestic violence, they often acted in ways to try to prevent the abuser from abusing them, and they usually felt guilt, and they felt like they bring it upon themselves, and causing them to get angry. So they try to act in ways to not let that happen. So some of the survivors, they exhibit some behaviors such as having low self-esteem, being very controlling, having a lack of trust, being very anxious, or feeling guilt about being responsible for the abuse, including having a fear of abandonment. Any questions so far? All right. So here are just some facts about domestic violence. 67% of all Canadians say they have personally known at least one woman who has experienced physical or sexual abuse. And on any given night in Canada, over 3,000 women and their 2,000 children sleep in shelters to escape the abuse. And now in the modern day, where we deal with a lot of computers and the internet, cyber violence is also a very big thing. That includes like online threats, harassment, and stalking. And it really affects young women. They're most likely to experience this online harassment in severe forms. And yeah, and it's hard because you can't actually escape it, because every time you turn on your phone, it's going to be there looking at you in the face. And it's not easy for a lot of people to just say, well, turn your phone off, because nowadays our phones are how we connect to people. So intimate partner violence, I'll be calling it IPV throughout the rest of the presentation. And this is a form of domestic violence that occurs between intimate partners or ex-partners. And it is a gendered issue where women are overwhelmingly more likely to be injured as a result of violence, requiring medical attention or hospital admission, and the fear for their lives. And men are more likely to perpetrate the violence. And the source for this was a PowerPoint, and I was reading it from the University of Regina. And it was interesting when they brought up the fact that men, they believe that it could actually be more even as a men on women, woman on woman, and men on men as well. But for some reason, men are less likely to report that they have been abused in a domestic violence setting. Well, they are less likely to show signs of being abused, such as physical violence, while women are overwhelmingly more likely to be injured, as I said before. Evidence also shows that women with disabilities are at an increased risk for being victimized by IPV. I like to believe that that is because they probably don't have a understanding of what's going on, of what's happening to them as well. IPV, it refers to abuse from partners or ex-partners, and this distinguishes it from other forms of domestic violence, which can occur in the family or domestic setting. So this is usually relationships, so boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, and etc. The World Health Organization defines intimate partner violence broadly as any behavior with an intimate relationship that causes physical, psychological, or sexual harm to those in the relationship. This includes physical aggression, psychological abuse, forced intercourse, and other forms of sexual coercion, as well as various controlling behaviors. And here are just some types of abuse that I have, and we're going to cover each of these in more in depth as we go on. So first up is financial abuse. This sort of abuse is usually the first sign that is seen in abusive relationships. And this includes controlling the finances in the relationship. So, not letting someone have a bank account, not letting them have a passport, not letting them have a job or seeking further education in their career. You can control how much money they make, or it can even be taking their family resources. So if their son or if their wife needs to go to the hospital or something, instead of paying for their medication, you take that money and you gamble it away. That's another form of financial abuse. And this is usually done to prevent someone from leaving a relationship, as they give them no opportunities to leave financially. Another part of this is forcing an individual to take out a loan or taking out a credit card in someone else's name and racking up debts, ruining their credit rating. Physical abuse. Physical abuse is probably, in my opinion, the most recognized one. When you talk about domestic violence, when you think about it, you usually think of physical or sexual abuse. And this includes like hitting and slapping, using weapons, choking, hair pulling, and interfering with the medical treatment. So not letting them go get checked out for the bruise, or if they have a broken bone, letting them go get treated for that. This also includes using undue restraint or inappropriate sanctions, not letting them do certain things at certain times. And sexual abuse. Obviously, this one is really violent. It's rape and attempted rape and sexual assault. And most women are most likely going to be experiencing this. No, wait, I didn't mean to say it like that. Most victims of sexual abuse in a domestic relationship are women, as I meant to say it that way. These also includes being forced to watch or reenact pornographic material, and denying them the right to use contraception. And psychological abuse. This just goes on to show that not all abuse needs to be physical. They don't need to actually hit them to cause abuse or mental harm or harm them as well. It could just be constant criticism of everything they do, yelling at them aggressively, being very jealous, accusing them of cheating on you, stalking them as well, threatening that you're going to hit them, threatening to end the relationship, being very hostile, having a hostile withdrawal affection, and destroying property as well, so chucking things around in the house. Spiritual cultural abuse. Basically, this one is not letting them go to practice their culture or their spiritual practices. So denying them to go to church or to the mosque. This also not letting them go to, let's say, go to a cultural activity that's going on in the community. This is also a form of abuse as well. You're denying them access to being themselves. And most forms of abuse are not, most cases of domestic violence are not just occurring as one form of abuse. It's usually as multiple forms thrown together. So you're not just going to get financial abuse and not just physical abuse. Usually it's going to be financial and physical, and they're all going to be intertwined together as well, used as a way to control them and abuse them. And this brings us to our final slide for today. You know, it's gone by almost too fast. So after this, I would like to, if Mario can unmute everyone and see if anyone has any questions or anyone wants to ask anything or clarify anything else up. So coercive control is a repeated violent behavior by a domineering partner. It's used to control an individual in the relationship, and it's mostly exclusively perpetrated by men. And it has a high risk of escalation after separation. And one interesting fact about it is that children may join in on the coercive control of the abuse, as, in my opinion, they think that's the normal way to treat somebody. And this can also lead to a violent resistance from women and men, where sometimes they can even kill their partner who's abusing them, or vice versa, as it can escalate as well. So I believe that is our last slide. So I would like Mario to unmute everyone. So I know I went through that pretty fast, so I want to see if anyone has any questions, anything they want to add, anything they want to just talk about. So if there are any questions?
What do you believe would be the best way to deal with these types of violence?
My opinion would probably be to reach out to the proper channels, like reporting it to the police, trying to see if the person can get help as well, in my opinion, not just trying to interfere in your own, trying to reach out to professionals who can help with this and keep the situation from escalating.
Sometimes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Sometimes as a woman, you might not realize you're in this type of situations. What are some of the clues?
As I covered before on the earlier slides, because I would say this is really looking out for how they're treating you, you know? Are they misusing the family funds? Are they being physical with you? Or are they constantly criticizing you as well? Are they preventing you from expressing yourself as a human being? Are they being physical as well? And yeah, it's also just, I guess, just have to pay attention to the signs, in my opinion. I mean, if anyone else have anything to say? How would you guys, how would you guys recognize it? Because I don't really have a woman's perspective on this as well. Well, if that's all the questions, I would like to hand it over to Tara and Jillian. They're from
question.
police victim. Sorry, did someone say something?
Yeah, I have a question. So with all of these types of abuse, is there any like, I know there's lots of help out there, but are there recommended ways on how to like safely kind of get out of these situations? Because I know oftentimes I've heard of stories in which people are in these situations and when they try to come away from them, it's kind of like they're pulled back into them, or maybe they're afraid because of what may happen if they do try to get out of these situations. Like, is there any, like, have you come across any research on like positive ways of how you can try to kind of ease your way out of these situations?
Well, that's a great segue because I was just going to hand it over to Jillian and Tara, and they work for the Halifax Regional Police Victim Service. So they probably have a better answer to that question than anything I could give. So yeah, I'd like to see if Jillian or Tara have anything to say to answer that question.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Tara. Preston, that was an excellent presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was a really great question. Is it Kai?
Yep, that's me.
Okay. So In our experience, it depends on the individual and how they want to leave the relationship. For a lot of the folks that we work with, it's very difficult for them to just kind of like up and leave because they may have children involved, close family members. A lot of our couples are married or been together for a long time. So it can be a very slow transition out of the relationship depending on the situation. So if that's the case, then what we do is we work with the individual to kind of come up with a plan. And that may simply just be getting your own bank account, right? Might be step one. Slowly putting money away. Being able to find out if you can stay at a friend or family member's house for a little while. Starting family court agreements so that you have custody of the kids, that sort of thing. If it's an emergency situation, then what we do is we work with the client to come up with an emergency escape plan. So that's figuring out like what important documents do you need to have with you, change of clothes, have a bag packed with cash, where are you going to go, who are you going to tell, changing your phone number, changing your social media, kind of all of that. It's a lot to think about in the moment. And that's why we hope that when people choose to leave, that they reach out for support, like Preston said. So Jill and I don't really have a presentation. We're just kind of chat with you guys about what it is that we do. And if anybody has any questions, just let me know. So a little bit about me. My name's Tara Borden. I'm from Dartmouth. I'm born and raised here. I started working at Victim Services 4 years ago after I finished my social work degree. So I was very lucky to be hired on when that happened. My role is the high-risk case coordinator. So what I do is I work with primarily women. I would say about 98% of my clients identify as women. And they are often labeled as the victim on the police file because we work with police files. And I work to support them either leaving the relationship, figuring out how they can stay with their partner safely, helping them through the court process, and kind of navigating them through this system. So I guess the first thing that I want to talk about is that there's 3 different types of victim services that folks can come across in Nova Scotia. It's really complicated because they're all called victim services, but we're all very different. So the Department of Justice Victim Services supports people that are going through the court process. So they don't necessarily need to be a victim of intimate partner violence, but if you are somebody that is the victim of a criminal crime and you're going through the court process, they will support you. So they'll do court prep with you, they will do court tours, they will give you updates on when all of the court dates are happening, and they also have funding available for counseling. So it's $2,000 worth of counseling that's paid for by the government for the victim and any family members that are connected to the victim. So that can include aunts and uncles, children, parents. It just depends on the crime itself. Any questions about them? Okay. The next type of victim services is victim services with the RCMP. So if you live in RCMP territory, depending on where you live, you may or may not have a victim services in your area. So RCMP and HRM, they do have a victim services, and it's completely run by volunteers, with the exception of the coordinator. Her name is Kimberly Richards. And a lot of their work is done over the phone. They do follow-ups, they provide you with police case information, they try to answer any questions that you may have about the investigation, and they try to point you in the right direction to community supports. And then there's us. So HRP Victim Services. So we've been around since 1996. We're a very small team. Right now there is our coordinator, Dolly Mosier. We have a caseworker, her name is Mercedes, and she works with folks that have experienced sexualized violence and human trafficking. myself as the high-risk case coordinator. We have our domestic violence officer, who is the only domestic violence officer in Canada that does his job. And then, of course, we have Jillian as our domestic violence offender navigator. So Preston gave some stats earlier in his presentation, and it's pretty consistent with the stats that we see at Halifax Regional Police. We do deal with a very
I gotta take the
high
fish in
number.
from the St. Mouse coming. I have a question.
Yeah, of course.
So you mentioned that you provide counseling to any victims that have experienced domestic violence, that includes children, right? So we used to have some victim service workers, counselor, I guess, that used to come into the school. Like, where do they fall? Like you said, there's 3 types of victim services. So which one do they fall under? When the counselor would come into the school and provide counseling to the youth, the child.
I'm not sure. I'm assuming that they would probably fall under the Department of Justice Victim Services. Like, were they providing counseling for the kids that experienced like trauma with
Witness?
school?
Yes, they witnessed domestic violence and the parents were going to court and stuff. So somebody came to the school and would meet with them once a week.
Okay.
So I wanted to know which one that fell under so I can figure out where to go next time I need it.
So the name of the program is called Criminal Injuries Counseling.
Okay.
And that program, it's funded by the Department of Justice.
Mm-hmm.
So if you or somebody you know is a victim of a crime where the person has been charged, then you are eligible and your children are eligible for $2,000 worth of counseling. And you get to choose your own counselor, which is really important as well. Your counselor isn't assigned to you.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it.
No problem. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
With the whole COVID-19 thing going around, like, how do you guys deal with these domestic violence cases and stuff? Like, how do you guys navigate that through everything being shut down?
I love that you asked that question because it's been really difficult. So we haven't been allowed to meet folks in person just because of, safety risk and health risk. So we've been trying to navigate supporting folks via phone, which is not ideal. You can't connect with people on the phone that you can in person. So we've been doing the best that we can that way. Preston, you mentioned earlier that the highest age group of folks that are impacted by intimate partner violence are ages 16 to 34. And that rings true for us too. A lot of our clients are between that age range. And a lot of folks that age do not like to use the phone. So it's been difficult trying to connect with people when we normally see them in person, but we're doing the best that we can right now. It's not ideal.
I have a question as well, going off of what Preston said.
Yeah.
So with that being said, with all the like the steps that you were talking to me about that kind of are in play that people go through to get out of these situations, when COVID started, that all of that stuff kind of get put on hold? So if there are people who are in the middle of trying to transition, was that kind of paused, and so there was nothing really, they couldn't really move forward in that situation?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I have a couple of clients where their safety plan or their escape plan has been put on hold because their abusive partner is now home from work, right? So they don't have that time to kind of plan. And I've heard from them, hearing from them is more difficult, of course, because they don't have any alone time on the phone. Their partner's always around. And I know a couple of them, things have escalated quite a bit since COVID. So we're now working with them by more coming up with a safety plan. So what to do when your partner is escalating, tips to try to de-escalate the situation. If things get out of control or, their lives or the children's lives are at risk, then, encouraging folks to call police.
Okay.
And I have a question or a comment. My name is Kayasia Benton. I'm a social worker at the Elizabeth Fry Society. So my position, really quick, I actually work with victims who, primarily women or individuals who identify as women who are victims of intimate partner violence.
Yep.
So I guess my comment and question was more so, I've just started this position actually in the pandemic. So it was really challenging to like get clients and stuff. But I guess something that I've noticed in the clients that I do have, the biggest thing, so I guess there's a couple questions, but the biggest thing I think is that like the clients that I've been working with don't really want to just like talk about it too much. So basically what we're doing is like helping them with supports, like whether it's like mental health, like I set someone up through the 2000, like they had the $2,000 thing, and we were able to like get them a counselor and stuff like that. But I guess my question is, I guess I see that there's a big gap in like really engaging the African Nova Scotian community. Like I guess just giving them a comfortable platform to access, to really feel comfortable to come to, like whether it's like victim services or like EFRI. To me, a lot of people don't really know too much about the position, which that's what I'm trying to really do. But I guess I'm noticing that there, because with the stats that Preston had showed, and just with like doing my own research, like there's a lot more, especially individuals who are racialized, who experience it. But like I just wonder, and I guess my comment or what I'm trying to do is really work together with organizations really to put the word out there that like that they can come and seek help. I do understand too, it's not as easy as well, but I guess I'm just wondering what you guys are doing at Victim Services really to reach out to the African Nova Scotian community and Indigenous community, where there is a big high, there's statistics that show that they're at risk, and it happens more frequently, but unfortunately the reality is with the mistrust and everything, being, you know, living in Halifax, primarily having healthcare professionals who are white, a lot of us in the community don't want to, like, just don't feel comfortable, right? Because of how they have felt. So I guess my question, if you can answer it right now, I don't know, but just like what has Victim Services really been doing to reach out? And especially like given what's happening like in the media. And I don't think though, I think it's something that should be ongoing. I don't think it's something that should just start because like a lot of the things are happening in the media. I think it's something that should happen, but you know, like what are you guys doing? And I really hope that that's something that's at the forefront of Victim Service really to do, because I think I'm finding it challenging to find clients to help work with who are victims of intimate partner violence, just because they don't really know of too many platforms to reach out to, or they don't feel comfortable. So yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but.
It does.
Yeah.
So I'll try to answer the best that I can. Let me know if you have follow-up questions. So
Okay.
For me, being from the African Nova Scotian community, it's always been very, very important for me to do community outreach, to figure out ways in how to help community to come forward. That has been something that, although very challenging, has always been something that I've been personally working towards. So in doing that, and of course this was kind of also slightly put on hold with COVID, but I've been doing a lot of community outreach. So I've been partnering with community organizations that already have an established relationship within the African Nova Scotian community, and kind of partnering with them on some of their activities or their presentations that they're doing, just to kind of say like, hey, my name's Tara, this is Victim Services, this is what we do, at any opportunity that I can. I've also been going into schools, so the junior highs and the high schools, to do presentations for the youth, just to let them know that we're a service that's available. You can call us anonymously. But it's difficult. And like you said, like it's definitely ongoing, and, you know, working under police, that name alone, Halifax Regional Police Victim Services, is a barrier for a lot of folks to come forward. And I recognize that. And so what we try to do is partner with our community agency. So if somebody tells me, and people have told me that they are not comfortable with talking to me, you know, because I'm associated with police, I try to make sure that I offer folks community organizations that they may feel safer going to. So I would love to have like a more in-depth conversation about what it is that you do in your role.
Yeah, for sure. I was
yeah.
kind of wondering that too, if we could, I know it's like probably not right now, obviously, but if I could like try to, I think I probably could find your name on like the internet. I'll like email you and we could talk further about that, because I think it'd be good to really start that relationship with like just, you know, just have that conversation, right? And
Definitely.
yeah. So yeah.
I love that. This is why we do stuff like this, right? So that
yeah,
we can connect. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks for that.
No worries.
All right.
So part of my role working with folks that have been designated high risk. So what that means is that in Nova Scotia, we have what's called a pro-arrest, pro-charge policy when it comes to intimate partner violence. So one of my personal missions in this role has been trying to spread the word and educate in community that this policy exists so that people can make an informed decision as to whether or not they want to get police involved. So essentially what it is that when police respond to an incident of intimate partner violence and they believe that an assault has occurred, so if somebody has injuries, if an utterance is made that there was something physical or threats were made, or if there's an independent witness, officers have to lay charges regardless if the victim wants to. And the reason we have that policy in Nova Scotia, we've had this policy since the early 90s, is its intention was to help protect victims of intimate partner violence. Of course, we, as the years have gone on, realize that there are issues with the policy, and the policy is being reviewed currently. But until then, that is the current policy. So I just wanted to make sure that folks were aware of that. Does anybody have any questions about that policy before I kind of move on? Okay. So we have the pro-arrest, pro-charge policy. So when officers respond to an incident of intimate partner violence, they fill out what's called a risk assessment. So based on what happened at the time of the incident and whether or not children are involved heightens the victim's risk of reassault. So in Nova Scotia, if you are at high risk for reassault, you are entered into what's called the high risk program. And it's a provincial-wide program that is in place to help support the family, not just the victim, but the accused and the children as well, to make sure that everybody is safe. So there's a number of organizations that are part of this protocol, and we're actually looking at bringing on more organizations to the table right now because the protocol is under review. But part of my job is to work with Jillian and our domestic violence officer to make sure that the folks that we work with are well supported, well connected to resources, and are ultimately safe. So what I'll do is I'll pass it off to Jillian to kind of explain what she does, because I'm mindful of the time and don't want to keep you guys here all night. And she can kind of explain her role. Oh, Jillian, you're muted.
Better? Good? Good. Okay. So again, thank you, Tara, and thank you everyone for having me. So same as Tara, I don't have a formal presentation. I'll just discuss a little bit about what my role is and then open it up for any questions or stop me at any time. So my title with Victim Services is the DVON, so the Domestic Violence Offender Navigator. So this is a brand new pilot project position that is part of the Standing Together grant. So it's a 2-year project right now, and I'm about very new off the ground. So I think we're around month 8. And it's very much, you know, a work in progress that we're building as we go. Essentially what my role is the other end. So when an individual is charged with a crime that's related to domestic violence, initially when they're designated high risk, my role would be to reach out to the individual who has been accused and I offer them support and navigation as they go through the court system. So I'm extremely passionate about this project. A little bit about me, my background. So I have a master's in social work, and I've spent about the last 10 years working with Department of Community Services. And something that's always been apparently missing for me that I'm passionate about is the role of prevention in preventing domestic violence, and also working with an individual who's been accused. So oftentimes a large part of the responsibility falls on the victim to be the one to leave, to make the changes, to ensure the safety of the children, to, you know, relocate, and the accused goes through the court system, which we often know when you're incarcerated or going through the court system, there's not a lot of help and programming geared towards change and accepting responsibility and figuring out what can we do differently so that we all don't end up in this situation again. So initially when I started, I was working just with high risk files. And then because I'm passionate about the prevention piece, we decided to expand, and now I work with individuals who are at risk of becoming high risk. So a little bit lower on the ODERA scale that Tara discussed. And what I do is, so initially when you're charged and then you are released, and I contact them immediately afterwards, so usually within the following day if possible, and offer them my services. So working with me is strictly voluntary at this point. And, you know, it's really important to mention that I recognize there's barriers, and we are part of Halifax Regional Police. So I make it very clear that it's voluntary. I try to work as best I can from a trauma-informed approach. So I very much meet the individual where they're at. I don't make assumptions about, you know, what the individual needs or what programs that they're going to want to engage in, but I meet them where they're at. So I offer the service, and they tell me where they're at with the process, what it is that they want to work on, and that's where we start. What we try to say is that how people get into the program is if they're accepting some level of responsibility. And the real message I want to get out is that does not go hand in hand with, you know, a guilty plea, or I automatically assume when I reach out to this individual that they did exactly what they've been charged with, and that's, you know, exactly how it happened. But more so working with somebody who may say, you know, I didn't do exactly what I'm accused of, but I recognize that I'm in a relationship that isn't healthy, or there's things that I could use help or support with. A large part of my role is also I can, based on my experience and my background, I can advocate for the individuals as well. So oftentimes the individuals I'm working with are going through the child protective system, and I can be a large advocate for helping them get access with their children, helping them get engaged in any services, programs, parenting support. You know, a lot of some of the individuals I need very basic things, like if they were released, they don't have housing, employment support, connecting them with, you know, appropriate language services, interpretation services if they're going through the court system. And then, you know, same to touch on what Tara mentioned, my role is really getting out and networking in the community. So, you know, I'm not from, like Tara mentioned, she's from Dartmouth. I'm from Newfoundland, so I'm not from here originally, but I've been here about 10 years and I'm still learning. There are a lot of resources that are here that are available that are not widespread, and we don't know about them. And it's my role and responsibility to learn about them. So if somebody is looking for a specific resource or to get connected to a specific cultural or spiritual community, I look to see what's available to them. So there's a whole host of things that kind of this role so far in the last 8 months has brought up that I'm helping people with that I probably didn't even anticipate in the beginning. And it's been busy. COVID has kind of put some of the program on hold a little bit, in that I really value the face-to-face approach. One of the things that I offer is court support. So if someone has to go to court, I can attend with them. So some of that stuff has kind of been put on hold as well. I don't know if I'm missing anything, but if anyone has questions or anything about the role, certainly by all means.
I have a question.
Sure.
I don't really think it's not really based on the role, but I remember that, Tara, you were saying, or you were about to get into some of the statistics that Preston had mentioned earlier, and I don't think you got a chance to get there. If both of you guys maybe can weigh in on this. As Preston was saying, I know that a lot of it seems to be focused more around women, meaning that the abuse is towards women, but I definitely know that there has to be situations out there where men are going through the same thing as well. Do you guys run into a lot of or not a lot, but you guys run into that as well, like where men are going through it and they're the victims in the situation?
Definitely. Preston mentioned when I have men that come forward, the biggest thing that they say is that there's a lot of shame that men feel when they come forward because of the stigma that, you know, a man can't experience intimate partner violence because they're a man. So I think that there's a huge barrier for men to come forward that are experiencing intimate partner violence. Our statistics for men are very, very low. For instance, right now I have a caseload of over 200 files that are currently open. And we probably have less than 10 men that have experienced intimate partner violence.
Okay.
But I think it's really important just to say too that statistically only 20% of intimate partner violence is actually reported to police. So we are just kind of like scraping the surface of the violence that's out there in our community. So we know that there is a lot of people at home that are at risk every day that just for different reasons haven't been able to come forward. Was there any other statistics that you wanted in particular? Or?
Not in particular, no. I truly don't remember exactly the ones that Preston presented, but I just remember reading somewhere, I think it mentioned how more of the physical abuse was more so towards women, whereas men usually seem to experience more so like psychological abuse. And I was just wondering if you guys could confirm that.
So the men that we are working with are clients of ours because they have experienced physical violence as well. A huge piece of that is that emotional abuse and financial abuse and psychological abuse are not things covered in the criminal code. So we can't charge somebody for that now. Like it's very difficult to get a criminal harassment charge, let alone an emotional abuse charge, right? We just don't have that. Our criminal justice system hasn't caught up to that yet. So almost everybody that I work with has told me that they've experienced deep psychological abuse. And a lot of them have told me that that is what stays with them much longer after the physical abuse ends. So that's why I think it's so important when we're in these roles working and trying to support people that have experienced intimate partner violence, we try to connect them with long-term resources to help them kind of navigate that. I think another one of the stats that I had like briefly mentioned was age groups. So we're noticing at Halifax Regional Police that we have a lot of youth that are experiencing intimate partner violence. And I think Preston had mentioned youth being like a high group. I think that was right, Preston. Did you mention that? Okay, yeah. And we're seeing a lot of like social media abuse, you know, like TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, like using those as forms of abuse in the relationship. And it's kind of going under the radar a little bit, whereas like parents and caregivers aren't really aware that this is happening. So when we go to schools, we're really trying to kind of empower our youth to be able to spot like the red flags in relationships so that they can decide for themselves if they feel like it's a healthy relationship or not. That's really been like our number one education when we go out there. Mm-hmm. Jill, do you have anything that you want to add? I'm just kind of ranting.
No, I was just going to actually, if you didn't touch on that, say that that's when I find education is a key piece, like getting into the schools, talking about what I think you had mentioned a question earlier, somebody had data about, you know, recognizing abuse. And I think that becomes something with some of the younger individuals I'm working with that have been charged. it's not until we have ongoing conversations or we're talking through things that they recognize where the problem is, that they don't necessarily see it as abuse. And there's oftentimes various reasons for that, you know, things that they may have witnessed themselves or learned behaviors, or just because it's not, I think when people hear domestic violence, you hear physical abuse, so marks and things like that, you know, means of like controlling another individual, and psychological, as you mentioned, is a large part that kind of does go under the radar, and it's harder to recognize, right?
I just want to quickly put out there too, because I think I forgot to mention it, that you do not need to have a police file in order to access victim services. So anybody can call us, and they can call anonymously. We get the calls all the time where folks just have questions about, you know, what would happen if I called police, or, you know, I have a friend that's in a really bad situation. How can I help them? Or I need to do a safety plan. Those types of questions. And we don't ask folks for their personal information at all. So if you guys know somebody or you personally are going through something, please know that you can call us, and, you know, police aren't going to be then knocking on your door.
Mm-hmm. I got two questions, guys. I got two questions. One for you and Jillian, and one for Preston. The first question I have for you guys, is there like a strategy or program you guys are doing to help with African Nova Scotian women when it comes to domestic violence? Because I know for sure in communities, our women don't talk. What are you guys doing to help promote and help encourage women to come forward?
So for me, so pre-COVID, what I was doing is I was taking part in some of the kitchen talks that were happening in the community, just to kind of get the word out there, because I recognize that women aren't coming forward from the African Nova Scotian community. There's lots of different reasons why women aren't coming forward, but for me, I really wanted to make sure that they knew that when the time was right for them to come forward, that there were supports in place. So I've been trying to do that. That was put on hold with COVID. So I was so pumped when you asked us to be part of this, because this is another way that we can reach out to community. And then of course, just partnering with our community organizations that serve African Nova Scotian communities. But we are always open to suggestions. So if anybody here has any suggestions, I don't know the best way to kind of like spread my contact information. Mario, maybe you can help me out with that after.
Yeah, what you can do, you can put it in the chat. Put it in the chat, and people will go in the chat and get it. And I'll also this recording is also going to be on YouTube, and so once this is done, we'll publish it.
Perfect.
And I just want to add really quickly on to what Tara was saying. I think another, hopefully, way to reach out to those who don't talk or don't come forward is the existence of this program. So one thing Tara and I have kind of saw happening since the DVOM program came in, and part of my role is to get out there and educate and spread the word on this program, is we've had a lot more victims come forward to Tara to refer their partners to this program. And that's something we hadn't anticipated before, but it very much, you know, I think for some victims encourages them to get help, because it takes some of the responsibility off of them and all the steps that Tara had mentioned earlier that it takes to leave a relationship, if their partner is then going to be able to engage and do some of the work. So a large, you know, chunk of our referrals come from the victim reaching out to Tara to refer to this program. So I think that helps.
Okay. My second question is to Preston. Preston, I mean, you talked about the introductory of domestic violence, but you didn't tell us about the workshops you are facilitating. Can you tell us a little bit about those workshops?
Yeah. So it's a 6-week workshop program that we have, and we have the John Howard Society come in. They do a workshop. I do a workshop with Dr. Ron Milne. And we have a very interesting one at the end. We have Dr. Omri. Forgive me if I said his name wrong. He comes in and he does his African spiritual dance and martial arts stuff. And when we ran our 6-week programs back in the fall, it went really well. We had a great group of guys come out. People opened up, and yeah, it went really, really really well. And I was excited to get to do the second half of the workshop, but COVID kind of shut that down with everything that was going on. But yeah, it was really, really good. And yeah, I think that's it. And any other questions, Mario? I do have a question for Tara and Jillian, though.
What were your experience with these men, especially men coming from all over Nova Scotia? What were your experience?
Oh, it was great. Everyone got along really well. When they opened up and stuff, it was interesting to hear their stories and hear where they came from. They added a lot of input that I never thought of when I was doing the workshop itself. And it was really just nice to engage with people and see their different points of view on the issues and hear their stories and stuff like that. I don't want to say too much because they have to respect the confidentiality of it, but like they gave some interesting stuff about some situations that they've been in where they have been the victim and the abuser as well. So it was very interesting to hear from them and hear their reasoning of why they did what they did and how they got out of what they did.
Preston, is there a follow-up to the workshops? Like with COVID, you said that it was kind of on the pause. Are the workshops continuing just kind of differently now, or are they permanently on pause?
Well, that's something me and Mario were trying to work on as we go now. Because originally we were supposed to do one in Dartmouth and one in Halifax. But since of COVID, we're trying to do a podcast. We're going to get that running soon. We're going to be, we already recorded 2 of them. We're going to keep recording them and releasing them as like a project. So yeah, that's what we're doing at the moment.
Very cool, thank you.
I have a question for Tara and Jillian as well. In regards to, I know that you mentioned that you guys deal more so with victims of physical abuse. I was wondering, do you guys have connections? Like, so for example, if somebody was to call and like express that they were experiencing any of the other types of abuse, like mental abuse, all those things, do you guys have connections that you would like send them to, of people that can help them with those situations?
So we try to work within like our community organization. So depending on what the individual identifies that they would like support with. We also have a caseworker that specializes in sexual violence as well. So if they identify that they have experienced sexual violence or human trafficking, we have a caseworker that specializes in that. And she is partnered with the YWCA. So they do quite a lot of work together on that. But yeah, in terms of the other forms of violence, we work with all types of violence. When I say physical violence is what we normally see, it's just because that's what police can lay a charge with. So that's primarily what we see, but we do work with folks that have experienced, and like Preston said, a lot of it goes kind of hand in hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost never in isolation. I think that's how it comes to us, but when you speak to the individuals, it's always, or almost always, other forms of abuse going along with the physical. Yeah.
The financial abuse is really difficult to work with folks on, and that happens at an alarming rate. Only the abuser has access to the bank accounts. Only the abuser is the one that works. It's very difficult when a victim leaves an abusive relationship and they're leaving without any money, right? Trying to navigate that and support them with that can be really difficult. But we try and we stick with folks. We don't abandon you until you get to a spot where you are safe and also well supported.
Any other questions?
I have a question, just a general question for if anyone wants to answer. What do you think we as communities have to do better to prevent and stop people from going back into these abusive relationships? What type of steps do we think us as a group can do better?
I think, I don't know who it was either Tara or Jillian who mentioned it earlier, but education. I think that that's a big one. So if people were able to recognize the situations that they were in and kind of like be able to identify the red flags, I think that that would make a difference, because it would maybe help prevent some of the situations in the first place. But then as well, if they were educated on like these aren't the things that are supposed to happen, then maybe they'd be able to like be like, okay, I deserve better than this, if they were educated, because I believe that a lot of people that maybe in these situations believe that it's what they deserve. Like they don't believe that there is better out there for them, that they deserve better than what's happening to them. So I think that education is a big one, and that goes along with support as well.
I also think another, and I agree 100%, collaboration for me is a big one. So community relationships and working together. I think there's a lot of trends with people not wanting to come forward because, particularly if they have children, because if I come forward and I talk about this, then I'm going to lose my children, or, Child Protective Services is going to be involved. So I think a lot of the, systems and communities need to come together and figure out ways of helping instead of making it more of an uphill battle when people do reach out for help and disclose.
So how the victim services, how much have you guys reached out to different communities to try and make people aware of your services since you've been employed? Either one of you.
So for me, I think that there's definitely always room for improvement, and I'll be the first one to say that for a while there, like I was pretty consistent with like reaching out to different organizations, lining up meetings, going out to schools, going out to communities. And then it just like the work kind of not gets in the way, but the work can be overwhelming sometimes. Right. And before COVID, I thought that I was doing an okay job. I know personally that I can do better, and I know that the unit can do better. And I know that because there's still large groups of communities that have no idea that victim services exists and doesn't quite know what we do, right? So when we attend group functions like this, it's really important for me to get feedback as to what can we be doing to get out there more. Any suggestions from any of you folks would be really helpful because we are struggling to connect with folks.
So your scope is only within HRM, right?
It is, yeah.
So have you guys thought about perhaps joining with, does the RCMP have similar services too?
They do. So they have an RCMP Victim Services, and they have a coordinator. Her name is Kimberly Richards, and we work together on quite a few different community initiatives.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think when I speak with Kim too, she also admits that like we need to do better to kind of reach out to all communities.
Yeah. So are you guys?
One thing.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying one thing since, and particularly with my program, which is newer. So in the beginning, I was just getting going with networking, and then same thing. There's just one of me right now. My position is part-time, and then COVID happened. But we've had a lot of interest expressed from other police agencies who don't have this role and have similar roles, so that they can talk more about getting the same role there. So we have been approved to do kind of like a roadshow where we would go around and speak about the program and hopefully spread the word so that others adapt and other individuals are offered the same service. But with COVID, we can't travel or organize large groups. So right now we're kind of waiting, and yeah.
Another thing that we did since COVID is we put out a video on HRP, which I started about victim services. And although it was very short, the goal is to actually put out a longer video in more detail about the services that we offer, and to just have that available on like YouTube and social media platforms so that folks can view that just in the meantime while we can't do those in-person meetings. But if anybody here has any suggestions on how we can better connect with community, please let us know.
Do you guys have any sort of social media page that people can go to and share your videos at all?
We don't. We have most of health
Good idea, though.
and police have like a Twitter account, and I don't think we do because we're under the community and public relations page, the CRCP. But yeah, are you suggesting like to have like a social media presence, like a Facebook page or Twitter account, like something like that?
Yeah, for sure. I think it'll be easier to reach out, especially in today's day and age where a lot of stuff is handled over social media. And since people can't meet up in person, it's a good way to spread your message. And yeah.
I love that idea.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I think that it'd be nice to have even more conversations like this. Like, I know that this one is centered more so around the whole community, but I know that some people were mentioning, I think Mario in specific, about Black women in the community. I think that there should be more things for the community. Like, even before COVID happened, like, it would have been nice if we could have gotten together and have a talk just about domestic violence for Black women. And I think that would encourage the women of the community just to come out and even just begin the conversation. So then it kind of opens that doorway for them to be like, okay, if there is ever something, or if I know somebody who's going through something, these are the people that I can contact, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question.
Hi. Oh,
I need to know exactly if you've ever met with the Black community to even discuss domestic violence, to talk about what that looks like in the Black community and what their needs are. Because culturally, I mean, what I hear, and I have to say that I worked in the justice system. I'm very familiar with the victim services and a number of services that come out of the court system and with victims. And I worked with both ends, the victim as well as the perpetrator. But I know from my experience of working with the system for over 20 years that how the Black community views victim services and views domestic violence is not typically what is being promoted through the victim services. So I think we need to ask the community, first of all, what does that look like for you? And if you needed services, how do you see that happening for the community? The mental health piece that has to come with that, as well as the charging piece, because everybody knows that if you charge Black men especially, they tend to get longer periods of time incarcerated if it's a matter for them to be incarcerated. And so all of these things are rolling through Black people's minds when they think about involving the police in a situation that requires, when they're thinking about having to involve the police. Am I going to send my mate and my children's father away for a longer period of time because I'm Black? Like, all these kinds of questions have to come up and be answered so that we can put together a solid foundation for people of African descent when they're talking about dealing with domestic violence, because it does not look like the typical domestic violence. And I know victim services. I worked in the same building with them for years, and worked with a lot of them for many years. If you got a African Nova Scotian man who assaults an African Nova Scotian child or the mother, the charges they may get may be extra. So you got to talk about their involvement with the police, how the police looks at that. You got to look at the fact that, they may end up with a longer period of time within the system. And there's a whole host of things culturally that we need to talk about before we can start jumping into a system that is not designed for us or by us. And that's my only concern. It's not that I don't support women being using the service, or men if they need it, actually, to use the service. I agree with the counseling piece, all of that, but we have to look at that from a cultural perspective and what that means for them, for their children, and for the community. Because sometimes, Black women don't handle things in the same very way. They may say, I'm gonna get my brother. But the thing is that we need to look at the education piece, the policing piece, as well as what services, the whole cultural piece, before we start telling Black women, we have this to offer you. Because then they start thinking, well, yeah, I can get these services, but they're not willing to lose their children. You know, I know that that's a major problem for Black women, is the loss of children. The fact that their mate, even though they may have acted out of turn and they want them held accountable and responsible for their actions, but they may end up with longer period of time in the system than maybe somebody from another, than a white man would. So, you know, I think that conversation has to happen with the community, and a plan has to be devised for African Nova Scotian individuals who are using services that are not designed for them or by them. That's my only concern. Having seen a lot of that stuff over the last 20 some odd years, I think that we need to really have that conversation, and we got to compile data that has to go in and be considered when you start talking domestic violence. Okay, these are the numbers, but how many of those are African Nova Scotian, and what process was taken, that kind of thing. That's how I view the whole issue around domestic violence.
Sherry, can I ask you, what in your opinion would be the best way to connect with community? Is it through like already established organizations? Is it through church? Is it through like what ways?
It's all of that. What I think needs to happen is if the police and and sometimes the police come into situations where and it's a Black community, they're uncomfortable even coming into a Black community. So they're coming in there with a different attitude. But I think what we need to do is we need to identify all the various services. When you say community, when you say church, when you say, you know, even healthcare, because it's mental health, people who are all working in these various areas. And I think there needs to be a forum, a discussion, a conversation, so that we can start looking at pulling these pieces together and looking at it from a cultural perspective. Because when you look, it's a complex issue when you think about the Black community, because there are so many other variables that have to be taken into consideration based upon the fact that we have a racist justice system, and that, you know, Black people are not always happy to see the police and things of that nature. So I think as a conversation has to happen, and then we have to start getting statistics, and we have to educate. And I think the education piece, and if you hold a conference, I don't know if there's money or whatever, but I think even something small online to have, like the AUBA, the Association of Black Social Workers, the health, Men's Health Organization, the HAC, ALI. You know, there's a number of Black organizations out there that can bring the different perspectives in, so it'll give you guys an opportunity to develop statistics and a strong plan to pull together to help you with your even educating the Black community around, you know, pieces of that here and there. You know, I think we have to look at it also from a cultural perspective. That's what when I think of, you know, various systems out there, that we have to look at it from a cultural perspective. How does that impact the Black community? And if you've got a plan, your plan for an African Nova Scotian might be completely different.
Yeah.
And are they going to go to safe houses? I don't think so. Their safe house might be somewhere, might be their cousins over there, you know. So we have to take all those things into consideration when we're looking at African Nova Scotians involved in a system that may damage them more than help them.
And just to follow up with what Sherry was saying, I believe that we even have to change the conversation and how we have these conversations around domestic violence. And instead of even calling it domestic violence, go back to the basics of caring. What does it look like to be cared for? What does it feel like to those, those everyday words that we teach our children? And when women are able to see themselves not being cared for in the way that they themselves describe, then there'll be, I think you'll see better numbers from the African Nova Scotian community. How do we do that? We have to do that from their guidance. Because what we tend to do is build all these beautiful programs for these folks to buy into, but the program doesn't meet their need. So I think we have to change the dialogue around how we have these conversations, one, and two, are the services, are the programs, are the resources available? And if they're not, how do we make these resources available, and how do we make them accessible? I think other parts around peer support and things like that. We talk about peer support, but we know within our African Nova Scotian communities, we love our aunts and we hate our aunts because you know what I mean, in terms of how what we say news gets carried, all of those types of things. So how do we build a better place for respect, for confidentiality, for all of those things, so people can truly buy into this is a program for me. This is a program where my voice can be heard. This is a program that I helped either build or I am a part of the implementation of. And then being able to share the power with those individuals so that they can, at least hear, what's being done with my voice. How is my story being shared? Am I sharing my story, or from whose perspective is it coming? So I think, the whole dialogue about how we deal with women who have been impacted by violence, and men, because I had the opportunity to hear the Moose Hut campaign presentation at the domestic violence conference that they had pre-COVID. And that's where they started talking about how men can take responsibility for their actions without the shame, without that piece that hangs around with you forever. So there was a lot of good stuff in that campaign. So I think we can learn from those who've gone before us in terms of, building. But again, as Sherry was saying, it needs to be cultural. So we need to take into perspective, what is the African Nova Scotian take? When we call the police, we know that our as Sherry said, that the men may have, longer sentences in jail, maybe harsher sentences in jail, even if I think that's where women have a part of that impact story, where they can say, you know what, no, he doesn't have to spend time in jail, but he needs to understand that, if it's financial abuse, my money is my money. How do we make that, a priority for that family? So I think, we really have to look at it from an individual perspective. And I think we really do need to change the language on how people buy into what is stigmatized as the stigmatization around domestic violence, sexualized violence, and those types of things.
Thank you, Tracy.
Anyone else?
So I would really love for this to be like an ongoing discussion. Like I don't want to have like this one time chat with folks and then never revisit, because I think we as an organization that serves community needs to be held accountable for all of the communities in which we're trying to serve. So I'm wondering, Mario, if there's going to be an opportunity for us to come back and kind of continue the conversation.
Oh yeah, in the fall. We're gonna invite you back, because I know the community is gonna have questions, right? I think this should be ongoing. We got a lot of people here, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of leaders in various communities, who work around domestic violence and sexualized violence. So I feel like you guys connect, you know what I mean? It's about connecting and bringing, inviting you guys to the community, but at the same time, the community have to accept you guys. So I believe these are the people who you need to, to reach out to, and talk to. We got Churro here, we got HRM, we got Cherry Brook, we got all the communities are represented here today. right? And these are not all the people, but you know, these are some of the people that I work with in the field when it comes to domestic violence and sexualized violence. So we will invite you guys back to have a conversation, you know, to create the platform.
Thank you. Really appreciate the honest conversation and the feedback and being able to be here today and chat with all of you folks. Really appreciate that.
All right. Before we go, any other questions before we let these ladies go? Any questions for Preston?
Amazing presentation, Preston. Great job.
Good job.
All right. Seeing that no
Sorry,
one,
I missed the presentation. Is it something that's available by email or was it something that you do personally?
I'll have to ask Mario about that because it's Mario's PowerPoint he put together. But we are going to be recording them, and hopefully we want to get them out so people can get them on demand as well. And we are going to.
You said they were on YouTube as well, right?
yeah.
Okay, great.
I'll send the links.
Okay, thank you.
All right. But what we're doing is we're going to continue on reaching out to communities. Hopefully, we're gonna seeing that we can't do these presentations in together. We're going to do it via Zoom, right? So Preston going to do a lot of this facilitating. But thanks everyone for coming here today. If no one have any other questions, we will see you. Oh, this is it until no more community Zoom talk until September. We're just going to take a break. We're going to regroup. Hopefully we're going to have victim services, HRP victim services in the fall sometime. Me and Tara will connect. And I know this isn't going to be the last time for you guys to see Preston. Preston has finished school, and he is going to be one of the guys in the communities when it comes to domestic violence. We're gonna work him hard. We're gonna mentor him, and he's gonna be the go-to guy. He's gonna be the go-to guy, right? And so we'll see you guys in the fall. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for
Thank you,
having us.
guys.
All right. Bye for now.
All right. Great job.